Muskie Factory.
Sliding the drift, rocking us into week 14 of the Musky Monday Seminar Series. Here we are again. This is the big week. It's all about big this week. Our guest this week, one of Canada's most famous fishermen over the last bunch of decades. He's a big TV personality, TV host. He's the creator and editor of Just Fishing magazine, one of Canada's most successful tournament anglers of all time. He was making money before there was money to be made in tournaments. Fishing bass is where he got famous, but he's got a lot of musky stories. Huge show and seminar draw. And my Shimano brother, Big Jim McLaughlin, is our very special guest today. Jim and I go way back. Happy to be working Shimano with him. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of musky fishing in Eastern Ontario. Our main topic today is going to be the other river, the river that's not the Ottawa River, the Rideau. If you're from the States, you call it the Rideau, but around here we call it the Rideau River, and it is indeed a storied river, an amazing place to fish. And it's actually an easier place to catch a muskie than the Ottawa River. So if you stay tuned, we're going to tell you all about that with Big Jim. He's going to join us about 7:45 this evening. Before then, as usual, every week we have Dr. Sean Landsman with Ask the Biologist. And this week, very fittingly, Dr. Landsman is going to look at the research that's been done out of Carleton University on the Rideau River, past, present, and future. Ottawa is a hub of muskie research. Jim Sarek said more research gets generated out of Ottawa than any other city in the world. And you're going to hear all about what happens and how it's all around you right here, and you didn't even know that. So can't wait to go through this with Sean. Going to tell you about our Musky Monday Seminar Series schedule. Next week, slight change of plan opportunity came up, and we are featuring, well, our topic is the hottest fishing is hot these days. Musky fishing is the hot part of the fishing world these days, along with fly fishing. Those are the two areas of fishing that are really growing exponentially, and then you can see how fly fishing for muskies is the uber hot topic these days. So who better to talk about that with us than Colin McEwen, the new fly fisher, and he's coming with Bill Spicer and Jamie Pistilli. So that's the whole team from the new fly fisher. I've been filming with Colin for 20 years. It's hard to catch muskies on flies, but we've got some exceptional footage, and we'll be breaking that out and going into the archives. So that's next week. Lawrence Gunther is also here. Lawrence, my good friend from Bluefish Canada. And Lawrence has his documentary is finally coming off the doc circuit and the license to CBC docs, and it's going to go on YouTube next week. So we're going to talk about Bluefish Canada, and we're going to talk about what lies below. Lawrence Gunther's awesome documentary that's debuting. And then at the end of our show next week, Brent Bocek is going to join us. He's got another World Muskie premiere happening at the end of our show next week for Setting the Hook. And lo and behold, it's an Ottawa River Muskie episode. So a show not to be missed next week. We get our thank yous out of the way as always. My tireless partner with Muskie Factory Baits, Mike Spratt, toiling away these days, and Lisa Goodyear, guide extraordinaire, producer and director extraordinaire. And you were hanging out at I said you were hanging out at the Keebler Elf Muskie Factory, and you said, "What's a Keebler Elf?" And I realized right away I had dated myself yet again. So good on you, young lady, that you were over saying hi to Mike, dropping off some leaders this week. And What did you see?
Yeah, he was hard at work for sure. I got a couple of action shots here of some blades getting painted up and ready for the season. You can see he's rocking some orange frosted tips there. And the last time I stopped by, he was working with green or chartreuse, and I think the green looked better on him, but still looking good.
Yeah, different color every day he's wearing, and his garage is pretty psychedelic on Alta Vista Drive. Una, his wife, puts up with a lot. So custom colors, and that's how we get them. Nice work, Mike. Thanks, and good seeing you again as always, Lisa. Um, Pleasure. We'll talk again in a little while. And Mikey, Michigan Mikey. Mike is in mourning. Mike Kadura, guide extraordinaire, also hard at work. Are you over the Michigan? Good news, Mike. We're going to be done before 9:30 tonight, so you can jump off that Michigan bandwagon and jump right on the Gonzaga bandwagon. So
it's a little bit early for that, but I guess I'll watch some of it. Yeah,
little too soon, eh? Okay.
Yeah.
Don't care anymore. I know how that is. Okay. Well, there's a good basketball game at the end of this when we're done anyway. So a pleasure. Mike will be in the background answering your questions as always. This evening, we say thank you to Shimano every week. 100 years of Shimano, a big part of our fishing. We say thank you to Andre Lalonde Marine, best boat guy I've ever been with, Crestliner Boats and Mercury Motors. Suick, Team Suick and Team Chaos, two great tackle companies we catch a lot of muskies on. Sail, Canada's outdoor superstore. Grateful to have them. Best selection of muskie baits we can come across in person around here. So fantastic. Muskies Canada, we love them so much. We donate $2 from every Muskie Factory bait we sell directly to research through Muskies Canada. And you're going to hear about what that research is and how it benefits not only just the muskies, but it all comes back to you as an angler. So can't wait to hear about those stories with Sean this evening. The Muskie Odyssey, April 17th and 18th. Best chance to learn 20 different seminars over 2 days. Everybody who's anybody is there presenting a whole lot of unique baits. Even Dr. Landsman and I are there representing Ottawa. So you should check that out a whole weekend, and it'll be up online for a long time after that. The Muskie Symposium, May 30th and April 1st. The Muskie Trader Muskie Symposium, raising money for muskie research. And some of that money is coming directly to Carleton. So it benefits us locally. And the research Sean's going to tell you about is, again, going to come back to you as anglers later. So very exciting there. A scoop to announce here. I'm pleased to say that I was talking to Doug Wagner this afternoon. You know, Doug, you see his crazy muskie pictures on the internet everywhere out of Green Bay, and these days crazy walleye pictures. Doug is going to be a speaker at the Muskie Trader Symposium on April 1st. So not a guy you get to see a lot at our end of the country. Really a learned young man, somebody who's achieved tremendous success already. So what a month of learning we have. And speaking of learning, the resident doctor in the house, Dr. Sean Landsman, the guy who takes us to school every single week here on the Musky Monday Seminar Series. Hey, Sean.
How you doing? How's everyone doing?
Fantastic. Great to see you as always. You know, where you work and I was saying before this, I went to school at Carleton for a year, but you know, I can't believe I didn't go there for more, considering that you can go to Carleton University and go and fish for muskies on your lunch hour, or you every single day or afterwards, you know, can go and the research that goes on all around the school, right in the downtown core. It's an incredible body of research.
I think I fell in love with Carleton back in 2008, the time my buddy and I had visited. We were working at the Queen's University Biological Station, and we visited Ottawa. He had done his undergrad at Carleton, and you can catch muskies like right on campus. Walk right down to underneath the O-Train Bridge, and you can be casting for muskies in some of the swift water there, and there's fish that hold in there. And anyway, so he and I went up and visited Carlton, and he drove me around the campus, and we took this little tiny boat. It's like a Pelican Intruder, if you know what those kinds of boats are, and dropped it in the water. And I think I caught a 30-incher on a top rater, but I could turn around and look and see the buildings on Carleton's campus, and it was pretty wild. I couldn't believe that. So I went, my alma mater, University of Illinois, you have to drive hour and a half to get to the nearest, decent musky lake. So it was like a totally different experience. But yeah, the Rideau is a really interesting body of water, and it has some unique challenges to it that other water bodies don't necessarily have, with a couple of exceptions. One being the Trent Severn Waterway out by the Kawarthas and Peterborough. But the Rideau is really an interesting system, and it affords researchers like myself and Steve Cook and a lot of other people, including Jordana Bergman, who I'm going to talk about some of her research at the end of this. And it affords us researchers here at Carleton a really great opportunity to study these fish in an environment that is fairly impacted by human development, and in a location that is very close to Ottawa itself and to Carleton itself. So it's kind of the best of both worlds, because you can run up quite the budget just in travel. So to have something really close to Carleton is great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Rideau River, but I do want to give a shout out to all of the muskie researchers out there. And this is a tiny list of all the different researchers doing muskie work. Dr. John Farrell, who, John has mentioned John a number of times, but John's down at SUNY ESF, Dan Iserman at UW Stevens Point, Derek Crane, who's kind of leading the warm water delayed mortality study down in Virginia, in that area there. Dr. Kevin Kapuscinski, Jim Diana, Lauren Miller, Mike Weber. There's tons of people out there doing muskie research, but these are some of the names that are really grinding out the funding paths to get some research conducted. So just a kind of a tip of the hat to those folks, because our research group here at Carleton, Steve Cook, myself and his students, we're only one part of the puzzle. We're only one puzzle piece, but it's the collective whole that are working to discover each piece of the puzzle, and we put it all together, and we have this really clear picture of how muskies interact with their environment and so on and so forth. So it's really a team effort. So I'll get into talking a little bit about the Rideau River and the canal system. So the canal system itself is actually a World Heritage Site. It's a really culturally important site, has a long history for Canada, especially Eastern Ontario. In total, there's 47 lock and dam structures. So here's the map on the right here. And you can actually boat all the way from Kingston directly and lock through and then get into the Ottawa, and you can circle back around to Montreal and then come all the way back around. It's a really interesting waterway. It's actually been something that my wife and I would like to do, is rent a houseboat, launch it in Kingston, and then drive it all the way up to Ottawa. And I think going up to Ottawa and back takes like 2 weeks to do or something. So someday we'll get around to that someday. But actually, muskies are only in a relatively small portion of the entire canal system. And this canal system isn't just the canal system that's located right in the heart of Ottawa. Technically speaking, the canal system is the whole stretch of it with all the locks and dams. So muskies are kind of found pretty much from Merrickville in the southern end of their Rideau River range, right up to the Rideau Falls and right up to the locks at the confluence with the Ottawa River. The biggest section of kind of the river proper there is the section we call the Long Reach. It's about 26 kilometers. And then from there, you've got some smaller sections that kind of chunk up the remainder of the Rideau River there. Major shoreline development, lots of land has been cleared in the riparian zone. So that's the area right along the river edges for housing developments and other structures. When you get towards Ottawa proper, they start to do a pretty major drawdown in the fall. We're talking like maybe 6 to 8 feet in some sections. It's a pretty substantial drop. It occurs over, I don't know, maybe like a 48-hour period roughly. So it drops pretty quickly. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's important and relevant to what we know about muskies and how muskies behave in the system. And so some lessons perhaps to learn for other systems that might be that might have to do drawdowns, or those systems actually experience drawdowns, particularly in reservoirs and things like that. There's also invasive species in the river too. Most recently, unfortunately, are around gobies. And these, I think, were first identified in 2018. It's kind of unclear how they got here, probably through a bait transfer. Perhaps somebody from the St. Lawrence River unknowingly moved bait from the St. Lawrence, where they're there in great abundance, and then moved it into the Rideau. We also have zebra mussels in the river as well. There is a little circle kind of right at the top here on the right-hand figure there, and I've blown that area up. And this is a map of more of what we would call the downtown stretch of the Rideau River, and then also where it breaks off into a much more channelized canal-looking thing. The whole thing technically is like a big canal system, but that section there is definitely very canal-like, super narrow, cement on the sides, it's channelized, and it breaks off from the main river channel. So here's the main river channel running along the right on the east side here. And there's a set of falls right here where Mooney's Bay ends. And then it kind of breaks off. It goes into the canal here. We have Dow's Lake right here, which I'll talk about, and then the rest of the canal. Then towards the end here, you have I'm trying to remember how many locks there might be. There's several locks here before you actually get into the Ottawa River. So muskies, once they're in the Rideau here, Mooney's Bay, they can either go one of two directions. They can go drop over the falls, which would be a pretty wild ride because it's a pretty sizable set of waterfalls, and into the river proper until it dumps into the Ottawa, or they can move through the locks here at Hogsback and then move into this canal, this stretch of the canal here, and then you get into Dow's Lake and then so on and so forth. So very interesting river system. So now I'll get into some of the research that's been conducted in this area. So one of Dr. Steve Cook's students, Nathan Gillis, led a project back in the late 2000s. It was published in 2010. This would have been one of, I think, the first projects that Steve conducted after getting hired at Carleton. But it was, he had volunteer support from Muskies Canada as well as some other anglers from the community, and they went out and basically caught 10 fish from Dow's Lake. And implanted them with radio tags, and then tracked them around the system. And what they found is kind of what we see in a lot of different systems, not just something like this, like the Rideau Canal, but in other natural lakes and river systems, which is that they don't really move that much in the winter, and in the summer they set up their summer home ranges, so they don't do as much moving as they would, say, in the fall or in the spring. So between winter and spring, you start to see the movement rates increase, which makes sense because they're going to start moving from their overwintering areas toward their spring spawning habitat. Then after spring, they'll move to set up their summer home ranges. But once they've established their summer home ranges, they tend to hang out in a particular area and just, they're pretty content there for a while until the water temperatures start to fall, and it triggers another movement, which is to head back toward the overwintering areas. Now, the decision about where to go is made really simple for muskies in the canal stretch here around Dow's Lake and the downtown canal stretch, because in the fall, they do this pretty significant drop of water levels. I was just walking along the canal this afternoon with my wife, and in the area near us, I don't know, it must be like 18 inches, if that. So effectively what happens is it removes all this habitat. I'll see if I can get my pointer going here. It removes pretty much like all this habitat in this really shallow canal stretch here and in this stretch as well. So once the water levels drop, that's almost bare at that point. And so what it does is it forces all the muskies to just bunch up into Dow's Lake, which is effectively an embayment. And then even parts of Dow's Lake become kind of inaccessible to muskies. There's an old roadbed that runs through the kind of northwest corner of Dow's Lake, and it can be kind of hard for fish to get past that roadbed, and you get past that roadbed and it gets pretty shallow. So you can see how dark this color is right here. And what that's saying is that those are the highest densities of detections or locations for those fish. So they're basically just hanging out. If anyone's familiar with Ottawa, they're hanging out right along Colonel By there, where it might be 12 to 15 feet deep all winter. And then again, you can see they spread out. They even use the narrow canal sections throughout the summer. In fact, some of the highest number of detections were made up in the canal section itself. So for those of you that might be shore-based anglers, might give that a try. Just be careful of all the joggers and the bicyclists. It can get a little hairy when you're going back and casting a bulldog and someone runs by you and you didn't see them. So one of the things they also found was that they can actually move through locks. So it's not that they found a lot of them that moved through. They actually only found one fish that moved through the locks here. So this is Hartwell's locks. Actually went upstream from the Hartwell's locks. But what it does tell us is that they are capable of moving through the locks. And basically what would happen is they'd have to get into the lock when the lock is open and then hang out there. And then when the other part of the lock is open, then they swim through it. So they can actually move through these locks, which is quite interesting. I'm going to kind of return to this a little bit later because this has relevance to some of the work that Jordana Bergman is doing currently and will be doing in the future. We did another study as part of my master's. I did the catch and release work for that formed the bulk of Project Noble Beast. But I also had another data chapter of my master's where we looked at activity patterns in muskies using what are called acoustic accelerometers. So the accelerometer itself basically just refers to the fact that within this transmitter, there's an acceleration sensor within the transmitter, and then the acoustic part refers to how that signal is sent out, and it's sent through sound waves, and they get picked up by kind of an underwater listening station. Again, I'll explain a little bit more about that later as we talk about some of the cool new technology that Jordana is using. We caught 8 fish. We implanted them with these accelerometer tags, and each tag is like $750. So, 8 fish isn't that much, but, we're talking about 750 times 8. So it adds up pretty quickly. Not surprisingly, what we found was that they basically just sit around. Muskies and it makes sense, right? We know that they are an ambush, sit and wait predator. All one has to do is look at the shape of the muskie and where its fins are positioned, which are, for the most part, the dorsal fin is all the way at the back of the body. The pectoral fins are located low out on the body, and the pelvic fins are kind of back far. And they've got this big, broad tail, and they're super long and slender. What that tells us is that they are built for speed. And so it was not a surprise at all that we found most of the time the acceleration sensor basically wasn't doing anything because the fish wasn't doing anything. So they did move, but just most of the time they tended to just hang out. one of the things we did find, and I've talked about this before, but they have like we found a cyclical pattern of activity. So we found the lowest activity in the at dawn, and then as you progress through the day, activity starts to increase, and then at dusk, it peaks at dusk, and then it starts to taper off at night, and then it comes back, to a low at dawn, and then comes back up. And so it kind of does a pattern like this. The Echoland stretch, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The Echoland stretch is characterized by having lots of weeds, lots of vegetation. So whether this same kind of pattern holds in other systems is debatable. I think the cyclical pattern of activity probably does hold pretty well in other systems. Whether you might have more fish moving around for a greater percentage of the day you probably would see that. You'd probably see fish moving around more, say, in the St. Lawrence. First of all, you've got more current in the St. Lawrence. But in some of these systems that may lack structural complexity or may lack like a lot of overhead cover, might not have tons of weeds, those fish might be moving around a bit more. So interestingly, I don't remember if I got a phone call or an email. I think I got an email from someone that said, oh, we caught one of your, or maybe it was someone from Muskies Canada that said, I have a tag that was given to me by a guy who was fishing down at Petrie Island. And I said, oh, well, that must be one of our radio transmitters from the work we were doing in Ottawa. And then I said, can you send me a picture of what that tag looks like? And he sends me a picture of the tag, and it's one of these little cylindrical, it kind of looks like a AAA or AA battery that we were attaching to these fish on the outside, as well as we did some surgical implantations, which you see in the top right photo there. So he shows me this picture, and I go, what? This is one of our accelerometer tags from one of these fish in the Echoland stretch. And basically that movement from the Echoland stretch down to Petrie Island in the Ottawa River is like over 40 kilometers. So I don't really know what happened there. It's possible it was somebody that felt a little bit guilty for harvesting a fish. It's also possible that the fish did move through downtown Ottawa. It could have gone through the river proper and fallen over the big falls, Rideau Falls, into the Ottawa, which would have been a pretty big plunge. Or it could have gone through the canal. It would have had to have locked through a lot of locks. It would have gone through a lot of locks. But it's possible. Still, we don't know really what happened to that fish. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about lock structures in a little bit. Then there was another study that was completed or published anyway in 2016 by Karsten Pankhurst. He was one of Steve Cook's undergrad students. I actually had the opportunity of fishing with Karsten. This past fall, he's another muskie nut. And Karsten, for his undergrad thesis, radio tagged both muskies and pike in the downtown stretch of the river proper, so not the kind of canal portion. So here's a map. Here's the map of their main study section, and then here it is in Google Earth or in Google Maps. So you can see that's this section here that we're talking about. And they were interested in learning about movement ecology of these fish in a really urbanized stretch here, and they wanted to compare those movements with pike as well, including seeing if there was potentially any spawning overlap, because we do know that there are tiger muskies in the Rideau River, including in that stretch there. I netted one for a friend in that stretch this fall. So they're in there, and so we know that there is some overlap. But he went out and he radio tagged both muskies and pike, and he found that there was actually significant overlap, both in the spawning period as well as in the non-spawning periods. They also found, movement patterns that mirrored, again, other studies, including that first one I talked about, where they, tend to move more during the fall and spring, and then seem to set up their summer home ranges, and then they get into their overwintering areas during the winter. The gray bars and the black bars, anytime you see gray and black overlapping there, those are muskies and pike, and where they've been overlapping in terms of location within the river. And this is during the muskie spawning period. So, you can see that as long as pike are still in the process of spawning or trying to spawn, which they do during this time period, you potentially have the ingredients for creating hybridized muskies and pike. So I'll talk a little bit about new research that's going on now in the Rideau River. Jordana, I think, is watching. So hi, Jordana. Hopefully I do your research justice here. So Jordana and I and Steve Cook and a number of other people from Steve's lab are all collaborating, including people from Muskies Canada. Have to give a really big shout out to Muskies Canada folks. They were a really big help this past fall, and we're looking for their help again this spring once the FMZ 18 opener occurs. But this is really interesting research that Jordana has kicked off again last fall. It was supposed to actually kick off last spring, but COVID really messed up a lot of our plans there. And so this research is taking place within what we call the Echoland stretch, which I've referenced a couple of times before this slide. And here's a Google Maps image of this section. So at the very bottom of the screen here, this would be south. We've got the Long Island locks here, and then all the way at the top up here, we've got the Black Rapids locks. And in between there is what we call the Echoland stretch. It's a nod to that tiny little green area there, which is Echolands Park. But this is a really interesting section. There was a meeting recently with project partners on the broader project that's going on in the Rideau system. And there's another student who's doing a bunch of habitat mapping and substrate mapping in the stretch of river. And there is everything from like muck and silt to lots of rocks to sand. And this is actually a very diverse in terms of habitat in this stretch. So very, very interesting with lots of complicated flow patterns and kind of riffly areas. And then you've got your pools and then some run areas. And it's a really, really diverse section from a habitat perspective. A couple of interesting things we've got going on in this section is there are a couple of tributaries, including the Jock River here, which anyone from the Ottawa probably is familiar with. It does hold muskies. It's known to hold muskies. They're not the world's biggest by any stretch of the imagination, but they are plentiful within that river. And then we've got Mosquito Creek, which I think is down here. Yeah, this is Mosquito Creek here. These are two suspected tributaries for spawning, and so I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. What is going to be one thing that we're going to be looking for. But what I think is super cool about Jordana's research and this project in particular is that we are applying the newest generation of acoustic telemetry tags. I'll explain what's super cool about them in just a moment, but in case people aren't really that familiar with acoustic telemetry, which is totally cool. And I don't expect everyone to be a telemetry expert in the audience. This is basically what it is. What you're seeing on the screen here, this figure. So these are actually other study subjects of Jordana's, including round goby. And so golf clap to Jordana for doing surgeries on round gobies that are like, maybe 4 inches long or something. They're pretty tiny. So she's implanting this next generation of acoustic telemetry tag in a number of different species, and muskies are one of them. So we've got these underwater listening stations. So picture a wine bottle. Basically, these things kind of look like a wine bottle, maybe a little bit taller. And then we attach them to tires filled with cement, and rebar sticking out of them that we attach the acoustic receivers to, and then we put them in the river. We'll eventually take them out, but we put them in the river. And these things are active and they're listening. And as they are listening, they're basically waiting for a fish with a transmitter to swim by or swim within detection range. And when one of these fish does swim by with a transmitter in it, it pings, it sends a signal out, and that signal then gets picked up by the underwater listening station and gets recorded on its onboard memory chip. Then we got to go back and get those receivers out of the river, which we're about to do in April. Coming up here, it's going to be it's going to be cold. We're going to have to get in the water and actually dive down and grab these receivers out of the river. So be a little bit challenging in the cold water, but I think we can do it. So these are the tags in the top right here. These are really small. Okay, we're talking about 8 grams are the weight of the tags that Jordana is using in her project. To give you an idea of how big 8 grams is, it's less than 1 AAA battery. So it's a very light tag. What is really remarkable, and is why I'm nerding out, is that they have an 8-year battery life. I was using tags that were, maybe about the size of my thumbnail in battery for Project Noble Beast, for the mortality tracking we were doing on the Ottawa and a bit on the Rideau, and those lasted about maybe 4 months. No, maybe a little more than that. Maybe about 6 months, something like that. They don't last very long, but that was 10 years ago. And so now, fast forward 10, 11 years later, and the technology has changed quite a bit. So what this allows us to do, and here is the cool thing, is that we can tag a little fish like that and track that fish and its behavior into adulthood. So we can compare following the same individual from the juvenile or subadult stage well into adulthood. And we can compare the behavior within that individual fish between that juvenile subadult stage and the adult stage. And so we can see how their behavior changes as they get older. And it's really cool. It's never been done before. This is, like I said, this is the newest generation, latest, greatest of technology. And super, super exciting. Jordana has spent many a day trying to get out there and electrofish these muskies. She had never seen a big one before. I think that one was around 36 to 40 inches, if I remember right. She was so excited. And we've got a bunch of other students at Carleton that are helping us with this. We had, I don't know how many volunteers we had last fall from Muskies Canada, but we had a number of them, and we would go out and basically tag team the water, and everyone was trying to catch fish for Jordana's project. We were moderately successful, as it turns out. Jordana and the electricity were the winning ticket there. So they temporarily shocked the fish, put the transmitters in, and then let them go. But I think we got a total of 15 fish tagged last fall, which is what we wanted to do. We're shooting for about 25 fish tagged total for the project. So we're going to need another 10 fish, which we're hoping to get in June when the season opens. So we're off to the races right now. So these fish are tagged, and we've got these receivers sitting in the water, and they're listening for the fish. And we're collecting data. What we were doing this winter was just collecting information on where they're overwintering. So we've got a number of different questions that we're hoping to address with this telemetry data. The kind of overarching question is general movement and space use within the river there, in particular over multiple years. So we want kind of a longer term data set. We also have other questions about are fish moving between tributaries and through the locks, and if so, how frequently? So I've circled the Jock River here, and actually, I shouldn't say I have. Jordana has. She let me borrow some of these images. Circled the Jock River here and Mosquito Creek. We are particularly interested in knowing if these fish actually go into those tributaries to spawn. We do know from research on the Ottawa River by Richard Moffett that muskies in the Ottawa do go into the tributaries to spawn, as well as using, of course, the back bays and things in the Ottawa. but there is precedence for these fish going into tributaries to spawn. And we're also just kind of curious to know, do they move through or between the tributaries and the main river outside of the spawning season too? We don't really know that. How does the fall drawdown affect movement? This is a pretty big drop here in this section. Again, it's like probably at least 6 feet. So it really has it basically removes a lot of available habitat to these fish. So how does that impact their movement? Again, where do they overwinter, which we've hopefully collected some data to help us answer that question. And then do subadults behave similarly to adults? And this is, being able to track them for like upwards of 8 years, which is really fantastic. And going back to that locks question, this will be really interesting. Jordana has these underwater listening stations on either side of the Long Island locks. So in the Long Reach itself, and then downstream into the Echoland stretch, and then going down to the Black Rapids locks. She's got them just upstream in the Echoland stretch, and then she's got some downstream in the Mooney's Bay stretch. And so we'll be able to determine if they're moving back and forth, or just emigrating out of the Echolands into another reach. So very cool research. We're using, like I said, the sort of latest and greatest technology. So as always, if you've got any questions, please send them to John, or you can email me directly, or you can find me on social media.
Wow. Star Trek, just space age stuff, Sean. You used the word cool a bunch of times and your eyes got really big, and so you're totally in the right field. I think all of this is amazing and so cool too. And you take it for granted a lot of times when you're Canadian. You don't really realize what you have, but there's 50-inch muskies in the downtown core of this city. Some of those studies, there's been nicely over 50-inch fish with transmitters right beside Carleton University, Brewer Park, through that whole downtown, that downtown stretch. And so it's really amazing, what we have here. You were saying you came here in 2008, you caught that fish and it drew you here. I was going to say, I used to ride the bus in 1975 so I could go and fish at Hogsback in the stretch at Carleton University when we were kids. We didn't know much, but we knew that there was muskies in that stretch beside Carleton. And since then, we only touched on a little bit of the amazing research that goes on out of Carleton. But since that time, a couple of the projects I jotted down that I've been involved in with Muskies Canada, habitat restoration, planting hundreds and hundreds of bulrushes in the Brewer Park stretch and all along Carleton University, planting 400 shrubs to stop erosion in the different areas, up and down that downtown section around Carleton. The 2 abatement projects, if you're ever fishing, if you're walking around Brewer Park, just above and below the Dunbar Bridge on the north side, there's 2 bays, and one is larger than the other, but those were projects that were funded by Muskies Canada, and they proved that you can build habitat for both muskies and for forage fish by creating these bays. And those actually became a model that is used frequently today. And you talked about it earlier, riparian zone degradation, all the building and all the construction that's gone on and just keeps going up and down the Rideau. A lot of the construction companies have to build those abatements because they will help sustain the forage fish population. They'll help all kinds of fish spawn. They help the muskie population, and it's all part of giving back. And it starts right in the downtown core. And we didn't even talk about the $1 million rehabilitation project of the Brewer Park Turtle Pond and reconnecting that to the downtown Rideau. And again, that was cutting edge. Nobody had ever done anything like that. It took a lot of political maneuvering from Peter Levick and some really, really good people lobbying for Muskies Canada. But there's actually a tunnel connecting that turtle pond and the main Rideau River, right? And the fish go in and out of that, and you can watch those fish. Can you still watch those fish on a camera?
I don't know if you still can, but on Steve Cook's lab, I know he's watching this here. Maybe Steve, if you're watching, if you have a link to that video showing with the GoPro where muskies and beavers and all sorts of other fish were going in and out of that culvert, drop it in the comments here, because that was pretty cool to be able to see this pretty good sized muskie, going through that underwater culvert there as it connects into the Brewer Park pond there. But Steve made a good point there that all this work will feed into restoration planning, particularly within this urbanized stretch of the river. The Echoland stretch is very heavily impacted. There's a lot of issues with erosion. We saw it a lot this fall. Lots of clay banks get eroded by. There's a lot of boat traffic. It's a very heavy use waterway. So we're hoping that by mapping the distribution of these fish within the system, that we can perhaps mitigate some problems in the future and work with the RBCA and Parks Canada and to help make this stretch a little more resilient to further change.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about that downtown core a whole lot with Big Jim. A lot of my first muskies when I was a kid in the early 70s came out of that Echolands. For us, it was that Echoland section of the yeah, it's an American pronunciation, I think you got there, Sean, but came out of that Echoland section, and I still go and fish it every year. I've been back since I was a kid, and to use your word, it is so friggin' cool that there are still really nice, good muskies in the downtown core and in that section where I was catching them almost 50 years ago. And it doesn't happen by accident. It's a lot of people doing a lot of work, monitoring water, water quality, development, doing all the research and the legwork. So, don't take it for granted. And it is just so friggin' cool. And
we're really, really, really lucky to have the fisheries that we do right here in Ottawa. You can be in world-class muskie fishing water and walk downtown and grab dinner and a beer. It's really special. We have something really special here.
People come from all over the world to Canada to catch 50-inch muskies, and there's 50-inch muskies in Dow's Lake, and there's 50-inch muskies in every single section of the Rideau River, from downtown all the way up to as far as your map went. So fantastic. I think we're making Big Jim wait. Is that right? I think
Big Jim. No, we can't make Big Jim wait anymore.
You and I talk too much, and we keep making.
We do. I know. I ramble a lot. This is my students tell me.
That's what happens when you're a muskie enthusiast. So great as always, Sean. Well done. Thanks for laying that out for us. And
excellent.
You and I will talk again shortly. So after kicking Sean out, I hope that Big is in the background. I got to say a couple of nice words about Big before we get him out here. You guys all know Big Jim for so long. He's such a big figure in the fishing industry all around here. I didn't even have to write that down. It just keeps coming in. It's amazing. Some things that you maybe don't know about Big Jim McLaughlin. He was the leading scorer for the Ottawa 67s, and he played for Brian Kilray. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment or two. Jim spends more time talking with kids these days about fishing and giving away stuff to kids and promoting fishing with kids, and that's something that doesn't get enough attention. The editor of Just Fishing magazine, Canada's oldest and biggest free fishing and outdoor publication, it's been a staple for us around here forever. So happy to have been able to contribute to that. Lisa, you got a couple of pictures of Big Jim that we wanted to pull up right now. One of my favorites. Damn, that's some good looking hair on Jim. That was before he's still big back then, but that was still Big Jim in development. That is a heck of a muskie right there. And that's a downtown Ottawa, not an Ottawa River, but a downtown Ottawa muskie. And so we'll talk to him about that. You got another picture there too? Yeah, I'm gonna talk to him about that. Not about that muskie, that mustache, and that I don't know about that mustache. Again, a great picture there. We'll let Jim explain that mustache again in a minute or two. So my Shimano brother, my good friend, somebody I've been hanging out with for a lot of years, ladies and gentlemen, a man who's caught a lot of muskies, Big Jim McLaughlin.
You're far too kind.
Leading scorer on the Ottawa 67.
Well,
Did I get that right?
Don't get carried away. I had my 5 home games.
All right.
I think I got 16 chips or something, 15 chips.
Okay, and you were there because of your scoring touch, right?
Yeah, it wasn't my scoring touch they had me there for.
The good old days, but
that's a long time ago. That's like 50 odd years ago.
Yeah, well, and to play under Brian Kilray when he was young.
It was actually Brian Long was the coach when I was there.
Okay, wow, even preceding Killer. Wow, big stuff. So something that not a lot of people know about you. I told you earlier I was going to start this off with a really simple question. What's the greatest muskie spot in the history of the Rideau River, Big Jim?
Well, I told you earlier, and I can't give out a number.
Yeah, we covered that. You can't say that, but
no, we don't do things like I don't know what it would be now. Maybe you'd go there and you wouldn't get bit but from what I understand, in fact, the last time I fished in the area, I got bit off a couple of times fishing for walleyes with a buddy. So I'm sure they're still prowling around there. There's yeah, current doesn't change that much in the river. It's sort of it's a little different, but yeah.
Things stay the same, and after you learn current, that's a big deal. And the answer to the greatest spot of all time on the Rideau River was the sewer outlet beside Carleton University. I say it's a sewer outlet. That's not right. It's a drainage tank beside Carleton University on the Rideau River. I know that was one of the spots we used to ride the bus downtown just so we could fish off of that spot. And I know you've got quite a history in there around the Bronson Street Bridge and that downtown Carleton University stretch.
Yeah, when I had the tackle shop on Bank Street there, the tackle shack, we'd be in the store all day, and then I was just a dumb kid that wanted to be in the fishing business, and we would get on the bus, or else my buddy Terry would pick me up. He had a yellow Camaro, and we'd have the 12-foot tin boat on top of it. It wasn't even 12 foot. It was, I think it was like 11-10. And we'd go down to the Bronson Bridge, and most nights the boat didn't come off the car because we'd just fish off the shore, right by the culvert and up and down that shore and around by the tennis courts and that, by the Brewer Park pool. And there's several pictures there of fish that were caught, right close to there. But up and down the Rideau River, it's almost like a storied place. You could make a movie about it when you think of how good the fishing used to be and still is at times in the Rideau River. I think the biggest thing now is boat pressure. I think that's the biggest enemy that it has. I heard you talking about the erosion with Sean and stuff like that. And man, every time I go to the Rideau River now, I remember why I'm not in a rush to go back because of the boat traffic. Like, it's nuts.
Well, you and I have seen it so much change on that system. One of the constants is that there's still good muskies up and down the system. There's been times when the populations were beat up, but I think you can say these days that there's a good population still up and down the river. And it's funny what you say about the boat traffic. I mean, it's just a ton more people and a ton more users. But one of the great ironies for me in life is there's a section of the Rideau River called Ecolands, and everybody has a different idea of what to do with the water, what the waterway's for. But it's the guys who love waveboarding and the 24-foot boats that you fill with water so that they can be extra heavy, so you can make 3 and 4 foot waves off the side of your boat to drive through a section of river that has eroding clay banks, or most of the sections of the Rideau. You know, this is one of the boats that's out there these days. Again, you can't be preachy as a fisherman, but that's just not good for the system, and it's one of so many boats that's out there
Yeah,
these days.
it has nothing to do with fishermen. It's just the ecology of the river is getting wrecked from boat wakes. It's boaters, even the guys out fishing. You know, we run up and down in boats too. And mind you, we're not making 4 foot waves, but it's the same old thing. It's just the users. It's just huge. I mean, you go out there. Yeah, I mean, like when I used to guide out there. Sometimes I would guide 5-6 days in a row out there, and you'd be out there fishing, and you know, it might be noon when you'd see a few boats, and there was always 3 or 4 in tandem, and it's when the locks opened and the boats came through the locks in a group, and they would all just race by you. You know, you've seen this. I don't have to tell you, but they would race by, and then an hour later, 4 boats would come from the other direction, or 5 or whatever, and you'd see a few other boats. But I mean, now you have to wait at the boat launch to get the boat in. It's just, you know, and it's not fishermen complaining. It's just people using the water.
It is a really popular waterway, and then just development going further and further and further south. And so, you know, it just is. I love your story about the Camaro and putting your 11 foot 10 boat on the top. My boat had Alcan on it, and I had a 9.9, and I put it on my my 81 Mustang on top of the roof racks on my 81 Mustang. And that, you know, and I could take it down and get it in at Bronson or
Yeah, mine had a 4.5 on it.
4.5. Wow. Oh, I can fly all over. I can.
Can you grab the picture from the Ontario Out of Doors cover? Is that there? Can they get that up?
Yep. Lisa
That's
can
the
grab
boat.
that.
That's the boat. That picture is taken from the Bronson Bridge. That's the bay you were talking about, Deshaun, behind me.
Yeah.
In the middle of the summer, like the Bronson Street Bridge would be like in front of us, and Riverside Drive would be like behind the canoes, or the canoeing article there, like down the spine of the book. That would be Riverside Drive there. And that is a guy in that boat called Ken Kaiko. He was a Japanese journalist I told you about. Came over here to catch a fish, and he caught a few small ones, and then he ended up catching one that was a little over 30 pounds on the last day when I had to go back to work. He was with Bob, my buddy, and
that just up from that's an international fisherman coming here, and you took him to fish just above the Bronson Street Bridge in the downtown core, and caught a 30-pound muskie for him. You know,
yeah, and he caught about an 8 or 9 pound walleye too.
Unbelievable. That 1980. Wow. What year did Bill Safe film Rod and Reel downtown? Do you remember that?
I don't remember, but I know it was one of the worst things I ever did. It was really my first experience with notoriety for a recognizable spot, because we caught a few muskies. Yeah, we caught 2 or 3 there. We caught 2 or 3 up by Manatik. Or not by Manatik, by above Manatik, by Peter Hurst there, by Hurst Marina.
Yeah,
we caught two or 3 there, but they were, if I remember correctly, they were all Lindy Muskie tandem fish. That's an original Lindy Muskie tandem.
That's a giant That's a giant bait back in the day.
Oh yeah, people used to look at me and think I was nuts. When I showed up with Suix, you were crazy. The only big lure they had back then was the creek chub pikey minnows, and everybody would look at those. And I wasn't a troller, so you know it was that. But I mean, oh my lord, people couldn't believe that you were actually fishing with lures that big.
That magazine was 1980. How many people did you see targeting muskie back then?
It was the same 3 or 4 guys all the time around there. I remember there was a little short guy that used to come down there. He was funny as heck, and you know it was really, really neat because he gave my buddy heck one day for having a fish out of the water too long. He was having trouble getting the hooks out of the mouth, and he gave him heck for having a fish out of the water too long. Came over and held the fish in the water while we took the hooks out. So you know he was a guy that that cared about the fish back then, because back then you got to remember a lot of them went to the frying pan, eh?
Yeah. Wow. And so you took that as a good lesson. That was
Exactly. Yeah.
that was stewardship back then.
Yep.
Fantastic. What's the biggest fish that you know of coming out of that section?
Just shy of 56 inches.
Wow.
Caught on a great big rubber lizard.
On a great big rubber lizard with a jig head.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Was it a bass fisherman who caught it, or was it somebody targeting muskie?
I caught it.
You caught it. Wow. Absolutely.
That was, I always joke about that because I took one cast that day and I caught the giant fish. We were so excited we left and
you went to the pub.
We did. We were so excited. We'd never seen a fish that big, eh? We had seen them up to maybe like in the high 40s because we were just starting to do it, eh? And then we had a week where we caught, I think we caught 27 one week from the shore. It was a fall day. I used to catch them late in the fall, just before the season closed. Sometimes there'd be ice on the water, and we used to catch them on heel and flatfish, T5 flatfish. And we'd cast them out just as far as we could into the river, and we would reel them back so they were like this far under the surface. If it was calm, you would actually see the movement of the water, and we'd bring them back, and you'd get within 20, 30 feet of the shore is always when you got the bites. So we learned really quick, and we started not casting as far, and we started catching more fish because they were working the shoreline, not the middle of the river.
Wow. That's incredibly big fish, and fishing from the shore. And that's another thing about about the Rideau River, and that people take for granted in fishing. It's one of the greatest shore fishing. It's got more shore fishing opportunities from right downtown all the way up, where you can go and find sets of rapids, below locks, below dams. That one right there. Yeah, that's right where Jordana's got one of her transmitters now, from what Sean was saying. That's off the locks at the top of the Echoland section right there, looking at that fish. That's a 1970s fish, a typical Rideau River sized fish.
Yeah, it was really funny because all the fish in the Rideau River, a lot of them had giant heads. I don't know whether you ever noticed that, but they had big heads. So I don't know whether that tells me that they were preying on bigger food or whatever, and had developed like that, through time. But the only one I ever caught that was really, really heavy fat was that first one you showed at the beginning where I had the great hairdo. That's the only one that ever, that fish was so stupid. It was so fat. It was crazy. It was just an absolute ball of fire too. It was cool.
And that fish came out of where?
Just Hog's Back.
And no, now Mooney's Bay. Actually, when you say Hog's Back, Mooney's Bay.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. And
so we're going back not that long ago. Jim's talking about 56-inch muskie. It's biggest out of the downtown section. Okay, and a 56-inch muskie is one in a couple thousand muskie anglers gets a 56-inch muskie in their lifetime. And then this is the next section up. This is at Mooney's Bay, and again, just what an insane fish! What a crazy fish!
Yep, he was in there eating walleyes, and he chased a walleye to the side. Just the sun, you can see the lights in the background from around Mooney's Bay there. He chased the fish up to the side, and we ran back up to the car, and I grabbed I just got a rod which I would have considered to be a heavy bass rod by today's terms, and I had a single strand leader on it, and I had a big bucktail jig on the back, like something comparable to this type of thing. And I had some plastic on the back of it. It wasn't quite that big, but we used to rig the plastics flat on them, like that's a shad body, but we used to rig them flat so they would help the jig swim like this, because it gives you the flat surface. And first cast I made, I reeled it about 10 feet along the shore because I knew he was working the edge of the rock. And first cast I made toward where I last saw him, he ate it right away. But that fish was, I think it was about 47, 48 inches long. But you see the girth on that thing.
Yeah, just a crazy fat.
It was almost hard to hold. It just was flopping all over the place, like you couldn't hold it. And it hit the water and it was gone like a bullet. Like, I mean, I spun around, we took a couple of pictures, and I spun around and I was going toward the water with it to let it go, and it started to go wild, and it was one of those ones you just disengage from and let them go, you know.
Get out of the way and don't get any hooks in you.
Let her go. Oh, there was no hooks left, but you don't need to try to hold on to them when they're ready to go.
Wow. How about Dow's Lake? Do you have any musky stories out of Dow's Lake, or did you spend much time fishing Dow's?
Yeah, actually, we used to fish there late in the fall. The old road bed that runs across the far end of Dow's Lake.
Yeah.
And there's also where the road bed is. They actually dug a piece of the road bed out for the channel for the boats.
Yeah.
And yeah, well, you know, this is really cool to talk to. You're one of the few people that knows all this stuff. And there was some big stumps that were very close on the bottom, and these stumps were probably like 6-7 feet across. I think they were old willow trees, probably, that had been cut down. And the muskies, they were washed out on one side where they sat, and the muskies would hide underneath the stumps and shoot out at the lures. And it was sometimes you'd watch them. And this was late in the fall with all the boat traffic. The waters dropped. The water would get a lot clearer. You could see a lot of things that you couldn't see in the summer with no algae. And it was so cool to fish there, to watch these fish just come gunning out. In fact, it's so neat because I've done several kids events along the shore there, and they got like 150 kids fishing. It's just mayhem. They're catching largemouths, you know, little largemouths. They're catching pumpkin seeds, and I got drool running down, you know, one side of my mouth, saying, "Oh, 50 feet from here, I know what's out there," you know. And there's still got to be a few there. I know there's some wonderful pictures of Hedrick's dad catching big fish out of Dow's Lake.
Yeah.
The giveaway was,
Dow's Lake is a rich fishery, and just an amazing story. And it's neat that a lot of the Carleton research projects, or the first one with the first telemetry project, started in Dow's Lake. And it's not a place that people think of, that think of as muskie habitat. But, you know, there was actually a year, 15 or 16 years ago, there was winter kill that happened in the spring, a condition that happens where, depending on how the ice melts in the system, certain areas, and especially with the underwater topography of the road and the shallow areas, where a section can get deprived of oxygen. And there was either 13 or 16 dead muskies, and 2 of them were over 50 inches in Dow's Lake, you know. So the fact that this exists in the middle of Ottawa, you know, in the middle of our city, just, you know, unbelievable. People come from all over the world to get that 50-inch fish, and it's at Dow's Lake, hanging around the pavilion where you're having your pint. Did you ever ice fish? Did you ever ice fish Dow's Lake?
Not Dow's Lake, but I fished down because I used to live right beside Victoria Bridge.
Okay.
And I've caught a couple of small muskies right off the foundations of the Queensway Bridge over the canal, like 8 pounders, you know.
Yeah, I know. I've caught some fish. Caught some fish there too. Hedrick Wachalka told me the funniest story about ice fishing out on Dow's Lake. He was telling a story, and he just casually mentioned going ice fishing on Dow's Lake. I said, "You go out and ice fish on Dow's Lake?" He said, "Yeah, they're unbelievably friendly." He said they drill holes for you all over. They put a pink circle around all of them, and you can just do like a course and go from hole to hole to hole. And, you know, you jig, and if there's walleyes, you're going to catch one, and you stay. And if you don't catch one in a couple minutes, well, you go try another hole. So there's a tourist tip for fishing downtown Ottawa for you right there.
There's actually one spot in Dow's Lake that's about a 7-8 foot deep flat, and it's on the right hand side when you're going upstream, when you'd be going to the lock, and it's it can be scary through the ice. I have a buddy that fishes it often, and in fact, he fished it this year. And of course, you're away from the skaters and all that stuff, so you're not bothering anybody by being out fishing with a bunch of people skating by you, zinging hooks around or something. And he had he had 6, 7, 8 fish days. So you go 3 o'clock and fish till dark or a half hour after, and he gets some fish that were 7, 8 pounds. He gets a couple every year, and they're big, beautiful, dark gold fish.
Amazing.
Yep.
Amazing that this exists downtown. So let's just move on up another section further up the Rideau. And actually, maybe before we get there, I asked Lisa to bring 2 pictures out. I sent them to you after we had Larry Ramsell on the program because, you've taught me a bunch about history, and you have some crazy pictures of big fish caught in different places on the Rideau. But there were 2 pictures that Larry Ramsell pulled out. If you can go to the other one first, Lisa.
Whoa.
So this is if I had younger eyes, this is somebody Ireland, and this is in 1899. And Larry Ramsell said that in 1899, this would have been a world record muskie had it been entered based on the dimensions. July 17th, 1899, and that was caught on the Rideau River. And then if you go ahead to that picture that Lisa had up a moment ago, this is the second world record muskie, and this is caught in 1919. And it would have been a world record had it been entered, but unfortunately there was a scoundrel from Wisconsin. Right, Sean? A scoundrel from Wisconsin who didn't tell the truth about the size of a muskie. Apparently, there's one around even today. I don't know if that goes on a lot there, but these people didn't enter this fish because there was a bigger one already on record. But this, again, would have been a second world record muskie out of the Rideau River. So,
wow.
Just incredible to think, and today, again, even with all the urban development and what's gone on, they're still crazy big fish. And we'll get to one of those in a moment. The Echoland section we just talked about. Jordana, if you're still there, Sean mentioned earlier, you're looking to get out this spring. I'm going to fish that section this spring with my good friend Kent once or twice. And if you want to get in our boat, I'll make that offer to you right now. You can get in contact with me about that. But how much time did you spend fishing the Echoland section and the Jock? The mouth of the Jock and the RCMP camp. How about those places?
Yeah, well, that's what I was telling you earlier. In the late fall, we used to go tie up to the marker buoy there after the traffic was gone, the locks are closed, everything, and we used to sit there with 3-way rigs and F-18 Rapalas and just sit with them in the current and let one back 75, 100 feet, one about 50 feet. Opposite sides of the boat. You'd sit there all day. You'd reel them in 20 feet. You'd sit there. We'd make a few casts with big bucktails or something. Do a few, but we used to sit, and inevitably all the fish would come on the 3-way rig. Just sitting still with the bait, just doing that in the current. Just sitting there because the fish are funneling through that little area. Because when they drop the water, it's not very wide. It's like, it's like 30 feet between the marker and the other shore where the rock is, and it was a wonderful spot. But even further back down to being just above Long Island there, or above Black Rapids, I've caught lots of fish down along that side, the west side of the river there.
Yeah,
lots of fish along that side in there, but they're generally not that big. They're like, I would say they're like like 38 to 42, 44-inch fish.
Yeah, the difference, Muskie's Canada logs show that it's easier. It takes less hours to catch a muskie on the Rideau, and it pretty much always has, as far as I know. Less hours, as far as the log data goes back, less hours on the Rideau than on the Ottawa. The difference is that an average Rideau fish is maybe a 34-inch fish, something like that, and an average Ottawa fish is, a 39-inch fish. So. But again, less time, easy at your front door. You hit on a key point, and Sean mentioned it earlier as well. The river, the dropping the river out 6 and 7 feet has a real effect on fish. And that study that they're doing in the Ecoland section now, looking at how fish use tributaries and how they react to water levels dropping out, that's going to provide information to a lot of places. Because, for example, the Americans stock like crazy. And when they stock in reservoirs and the water goes high, their fish swim over the top of the reservoir. When fish have an opportunity to travel, they do a lot of times. So the higher water and the lower water really do influence behavior. And one of the things I was going to mention, when they drop the water out in Dow's Lake or in Ecolands or anywhere on the Rideau, you were talking about special fishing there, and that's fishing in one of the holes, right? It's fishing in one of the deeper sections. Yeah. Because when they're dropping the water out, your biggest fish especially, but more and more of your muskies are attracted to the deep water holes. The biggest fish in a system are usually attracted to a deep water hole. And after they drop it out, you get real concentrations in the deep water holes in the fall. And so that's a real key. And I'll pass on one other tip since I'm rambling for a moment. On when they drop the water out, it's a really great chance for people to learn. If you go and look at your water in the winter, I know you've done this, because this is what fish heads do. If you go and look at your river in the winter, and if you go look at the Rideau in the winter, it's dropped down 6, 7, 8 feet or more in different sections. And now all of a sudden you see all the shorelines, and you see the creases, and you see the flats, and you see where rock transitions to mud, and you see where there's a drop off. And so, we used to go and take pictures. I don't know about you, but we used to go
I've used pictures in articles to explain to people, here's what you're looking for under the water, stuff like this. And it's and Ecolands is probably the best of all because of all the rock.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows drop offs, it shows boulders. And like I've said, the one thing that I really learned that I keyed on was I caught so many muskies off where current impacted shore or impacted an object, that type of stuff. And when the water's down and you see it, you go back in the summertime with a picture and you look at it and you go, there's the bulrush's end there. So that rock should be right there. And you throw a big jig over there, or you reel a big bucktail over it, whoosh.
Yeah, it all makes sense. It's putting the puzzle together. And I mean, that was that kind of knowledge. You were taking those pictures. It's funny. I have a whole photo library of Ecolands from fishing it in November with Mike Spratt. Back in the 90s.
Kodak Instamatic.
Yeah, that was a great teacher back in the day. So those deep holes, they really concentrate fish, and it's a big deal. How about the Jock River? Did you fish the Jock much?
I fished a few times up by Twin Elms.
Yeah,
up above there. I never did that good. I know guys that have absolutely clobbered them though, and got some big fish too, like fish that would scare you.
Yeah. There's people who still get 50s out of the Jock now. Sean said something earlier, and I never disagree with Sean. That guy is so smart. But he said that the Jock produces a lot of smaller fish. And I get some pictures sent to me of some nice fish out of the Jock. And there was a census done with a lot of electroshocking that Muskies Canada helped with about 20 years ago on the Rideau. And the only 50-inch muskie that was trapped in that study was caught in the Jock proper, I believe. And so, again, an amazing urban fishery. The fact that it's got muskies in it, phenomenal. Let's move up from the Ecoland section to Manotick. Now, you were talking about Hearst Marina in that section, the Manotick Mill. Did you fish there as a kid?
Yep, that little thing at the side there where that wooden gate is underneath. I've waded in there and seen muskies in there when opening a walleye season. There'd be 4 or 5 of them in there. I think they spawned in there. I'm not sure, but you'd literally have them swimming between your legs, and around. It was the coolest thing in the world, and like nobody seemed to know that they were there. But I always had to go that little step extra and get in the water to go look. I did a lot of wading and that fishing for muskies, like in little places like that. Small rivers really grabbed me. It's what I was. Like I said to you, to send me to Lake St. Clair or the St. Lawrence. Yeah, I can put something together with what I've learned from being out there with other guys and stuff like that. But where I taught myself to fish for muskies was in small rivers. And there's some other good little rivers that are north of Ottawa too that there's a lot of fish in. But yeah, that bit around Manotick there was always fish there, always. So they had to come up from down by the RCMP camp in that stretch. Yeah, because I don't think they would. I don't think they'd winter up there.
Well, you and I learned the same way because we were both jig fishermen. I was coming down to your store on Bank Street in the early 80s or in the 80s, and getting jigs from you and talking about how to jig fish and hanging out with.
That's a long time ago.
Eddie Little Jig, one of our best producing musky baits. But if you learn current and if you fish current breaks with a jig, that's where the fish hang out, close to the bottom on the current breaks. And it doesn't matter if it's bass or walleye or muskie, and so on the Rideau, that pattern just works all over.
Yeah, but like I say, I mean, I used, like I showed you, I tried to find some other stuff out in the garage, but like that type of stuff right there. And I had some bigger ones, and we used to use these things here. I dug the box out in the garage because they were really tough plastic. They were called
Reaper tails.
Yeah. Oh, geez, yeah. We used to get a lot of that. I think these were called salt shakers. They were made by the guys that made the Sluggo, and they made different sizes. But I used to fish this here on a brown hair jig out the back. It's a pretty long bait. I think it's like 7 inches long. But we would fish them turned sideways like this on the hook, and we used to just swim the jigs back. Like you weren't, pulling and tugging them. We just cast them out there and swim them back. And the other thing that I used to use was just almost like a giant sized bass jig with, some kind of a tail out the back. So it was, it's definitely something that really, really works, and you catch fish. Yeah, I went out and looked for this box after I talked with you today, and it's amazing how you can find, stuff that's the color that I used to like right there. I used to get those out of the States, and I liked them because they had an 8/0 hook in them. It wasn't a little weenie hook that you were scared to put a big plastic on and it would hide it. And of course, some of Mike's tubes, that size of tube. But I thought that was getting a bit big. I was just starting to get big. And when you see some of the stuff that they use now, my God, every time I know, it's just scary. And it's not. I mean, I was over talking to Mike a while ago, and he gave me this, and I told him I wanted the smaller ones. I got no problem chucking this or trolling you down the St. Lawrence, even in a Rideau, you'll catch a fish with it, But what my strong point was fishing that smaller stuff and a lot of targeted, almost like bass fishing. You were sort of targeting areas, and once you get to know them, learning to read current with depth was so important. Something that I try to explain to people is that they would see a riffle on the top, and all the trout guys are going to know this right away. So they see a riffle on the top, but the riffle, if the water's only 2 feet deep, then the riffle's probably right by the boulder. But if the water's 15 feet deep, the riffle could be 30 feet downstream by the time that water that's been disturbed comes up to the top, and you see it. So you've got to back up to find the fish, and it was little things like this, and I'd be guiding and telling guys, see that on the top of the water? We'll try to cast like half a cast behind that. Well, why wouldn't I cast right at it? Because there's nothing there but moving water. The thing that's making the water move is 30 feet upstream because the water's a bit deeper. But it's the Rideau is like that. It works. Weed points in the Rideau River and fishing anywhere there's a marker buoy, the big block on the bottom and the chain.
Yeah, I've said this on this show before too, but the best advice you can get about the Rideau is they mark all the fishing spots for you. They put either a red buoy or a green buoy at every good fishing spot on the Rideau. So if all you do is travel and stop at all of those, you'll do just fine. And and those are marking structure. The other thing about the Rideau in terms of when you finally start to get smart, it's a really patternable river because it does this back and forth. It S's to the right and it S's to the left. And every time it S's to the right, the current goes around close to the shore, and there's a deep side. And on the other side of that, there's a shallow flat. And then when it goes around the corner, now the shallow flat is on your right side, and your deep stretch is on the other side. And then there's a channel with a weed drop on both sides. So, when you start to pattern the muskies, you can really put it together and have a good day. You said like 27 muskies in a day? That was your number?
No, in a week.
In a week. Okay. Well, 27 in a week is still a damn good muskie pattern anywhere that you go. And, that's a pretty incredible catch,
Yeah, I've never come close to that. And something else, like that was fishing with my buddy Terry, the guy who had the yellow Camaro. And it's the only Camaro that smelled like muskies. It was just so much activity of slime on pants getting in that thing after we were there. He'd get in that vehicle on a hot day. It'd be 90 degrees. The windows were up. He'd be at work. He'd come out with you couldn't believe the smell that would come out of that vehicle. It was just absolutely nuts.
And damn proud of the way his Camaro smelled too.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
Muskie guys think that smells great. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so true what you say about these bends, though, especially when you get further up the river. And I found that as it got to the fall, I spent more time on the deep ones, and in the summertime, I would be on the other side. And then there was days when you just crisscrossed back and forth, put the electric on high, and went for it. Something else I did in the Rideau River too is I've caught some decent fish Carolina rigging with big baits. Piece of single strand leader.
Yeah.
Big lizard baits, like 8, 10-inch long bass lizard baits. Stuff like that. Only a few, but I haven't done it that much either. I probably got 10 hours invested at it in my life doing it. And I've caught, I don't know, maybe half a dozen fish doing it. So that's it's a pretty good average. Caught a lot more big walleyes, but
we've been learning a lot from bass guys on this show. We had Pete Bowman on here. He's one of the ultimate bass heads. But when this is all said and done, the people are going to go away, and it's muskie guys are slow, and we're going to start to think back and go, all of those bass guys told us that they were catching muskies on jigs by accident. So maybe the jig is a good idea. And then the Carolina rig, again, you're not the first guy to come on here and talk about didn't try it that long, but catching big fish or catching fish on those. And we muskie guys are the last adapters of new technology. But the thing that the jig and the Carolina rig both have in common, and that Sean tells you from Project Noble Beast, is the muskies lay on the bottom most of the time, inactive. And he touched on that today with the transmitters. And you're fishing jigs and Carolina rigs close to the bottom, getting really close to the fish. And because you know how to read current, you're getting right on where the fish are. And lo and behold,
I'm going to disappear for 15 seconds. I got to show you something else you'll never believe.
All right, I'm going to wait 15 seconds for that.
Hang on. I found these cleaning out a box the other day. I caught 3 muskies one week, and I caught 3 fish on 5 casts across the mouth of a bay at Echo Lens by the hydro lines with a big offset hook, a 7/0 offset hook, and a big giant sluggo. Just twitching it, you just drop the rod tip, just pull it, let it just glide, let it sink down a little bit, pull it, let it just glide, and I caught 3 on 5 casts. The particular one, I think I have another one here. We used to put little pieces of lead through it and cut it off to add weight, but you'd slide it in like you were pushing a pencil through it, a nail, and snip them off at the edge so it added weight right in the middle and evenly distributed so it stayed horizontal. But when you watch something like the size of that, and it just glides effortlessly through the water, it's amazing how many fish you'll catch doing it. And it's just like the Carolina rig. I didn't use it that much. Bought 2 packages of them. I still have 2 of the baits. But you caught some fish, but you sort of let it get away from you. Why? Because you got to go. You're supposed to be fishing with this. Some beat up old thing with the hair eaten off it, or with the jig. And I sort of rediscover stuff every few years, whether it be bass fishing, whether it be fishing for panfish in the springtime. Right now, you bring those old things out of the bag and they still work, and sometimes they work really good because nobody's doing it.
Well, and in the musky world now, we've been stuck on the double-bladed bucktails. Just changed our world going back 20 years ago.
But heck, it works.
But those fish haven't seen the baits that you threw before those double-bladed bucktails came along. So, there's a place for single-bladed bucktails. There's a place for a lot of that old stuff. What's old is new because the fish haven't seen it and they're just not used to it. Absolutely.
Another thing that musky guys that we could take as musky anglers from bass guys is that the way the bass world is just absolutely driven by new stuff. It's they'll if they don't have something really new, they'll take this and they'll put a wing on each side that's a 1/4 inch long, like just to make it different, something different. But what are they all still fishing? A flipping jig.
But you got to have all the new stuff, Jim. You got to have it anyway.
You got to have it all, but they're still all fishing the same old flipping jig. It's
a need. What's the biggest fish you've heard out of the Rideau in the modern day?
Dad at Manitic Bait and Tackle told me there was a young lad there maybe 5 years ago got one that was like in the maybe 52, 53 inches.
Dan out at Manitic Bait and Tackle. We're going to have our Muskie Factory baits in there in a week or two. So
are you?
Really looking forward to announcing that. So I'm happy to work with Dan. I didn't announce that yet, but we're going to have a big announcement in a week or two.
What were you saying again?
Yeah, we'll do a big announcement in a week or two. Biggest fish I've heard of out of the Rideau in the modern day, Ed Puttifat, who just retired from Paddle Tails. Out in the Kempville Cars section, 56.5, I believe, was and that was bigger than anything registered out of the Ottawa that year. That fish is not that long ago, and you could actually trace the history of that fish. It was caught a number of times, when it was over 50 inches. But again, amazing story as we go further up the Rideau. I wanted to ask you, what's the furthest up the Rideau that muskies exist? Sean talked earlier, it's funny that Rideau system, you get up to Big Rideau Lake. How can there be no muskies in Big Rideau Lake? Like, is there a line somewhere where they said no muskies across this?
I caught one day in Smith Falls at the old metal bridge that's up in the air, the old train bridge. I went to show a guy. I was into Bennett's Bait and Tackle when it was still there, and there was a guy bought a bait caster from Wayne, and I brought him over to show him how to use a bait caster. I just had a spinner bait on it, and I was just showing him how to set it up and how to use it so he wouldn't get tangled. And the first cast I make, I catch like I forget how big it was. It was like 6-8 pound muskie, just a little guy, But it did the old twirl through the air, and I handed him the rod right away. I stuck it and it jumped, and I handed him the rod. And then he's bragging at the store half an hour later that he caught his first muskie. I mean, I think you could have thrown an empty tin can over there or an old glove, and this fish was going to hit that. This thing hit the water and it blew back up with it, and it saw it coming. I think it was like he was waiting back in center field for the thing to land. But yeah, I saw one there, so that's only a lock away from the big Rideau. But yet, I've had guys tell me they've caught them. A lot of them turn out to be pike.
Yeah,
I can't figure that one out myself. I've caught them. I've caught them below Smith Falls. I caught one at Sly's Lock. I caught one there one day fishing for crappie. Well, I didn't catch it on the lure. I caught it on the crappie. I was bringing in a crappie. I don't know. He's probably like 15 pounds, a standard Rideau fish, and popped up and grabbed the crappie and did a couple of laps with it and let it go. So you see it, you know they're there. But Merrickville was the last, as far as I used to come north looking for them. And I've had a couple of pretty decent days there.
I had some good days at Merrickville going back to the 80s when I was fishing out of a canoe. And, that was our that's what we stocked our muskies in back then, and it worked. Change on the Rideau. We talked earlier, with older eyes, you recognize the change. The big changes on the Rideau. What's the biggest change you've seen on the Rideau? Probably. Well, you said boat.
Yeah, that's the water clarity.
And that's the zebra mussels, right? That's because of the zebra mussels?
Zebra mussels and whatever. When I used to fish there, the number of boils that you would get from fish, because you couldn't see them. Even if you brought the lure in and you did a couple of circles at the boat, which really hadn't become a thing to do back then, you'd sort of hesitate sometimes, or you'd do a figure eight if you thought you saw something. But the number of times that you'd be bringing a lure in and you'd have it 30 feet from the boat and you'd see the water well up behind it. And I really believe that was the water was just, in some places, was the algae, and it was just so murky in the summertime, especially, that I just think the fish just couldn't see as well. And then in recent years, I noticed that late into the fall, like I mentioned earlier about Dallas Lake, the water would settle down, the traffic was gone, and clarity became, like in the fish's favor. It was cool. I remember one day having Bruce Tufts out, and I was talking to Bruce, and I said to him, I said, there seems to be so many more small muskies in the Rideau. It looked to me, I forget how, it was a long time ago, but I said, it's got to be a good thing, eh? And he looked at me and he said to me, that's because it's easier for them to feed now because the water's gotten clearer, because they're primarily a sight feeder. And it was, it's just, it's just so true, because the number of small muskies I hear about in the Rideau, you must hear about it too. Guys out walleye bass fishing, they get nipped, or they're catching, they're not big fish, they're 34-inch fish, 32, whatever. But just the fact that they're there, and it's starting to see a lot more tiger muskies too. I get pictures, guys send me little tigers, they're 30 inches, 36 inches. So it's
yeah. Sean explained that really well. The Rideau, I used to catch tigers every year, and that's when I was younger and fishing the Rideau, and that was the place. And if I was thinking earlier, one of the best pictures I've seen of you is a Tim Allard photo of you holding, I think, an Echolands tiger, just releasing it over the side of the boat. And it is one of the prettiest muskies I have seen, but just gorgeous fish that occurs naturally in the Rideau at a higher rate than in most water bodies, because the pike and muskies tend to overlap in their spawning, it looked like from the research. So very cool. We try to take this show just till 8:30 every week, and when we have good guests, we always go a little bit past that, Big Jim. So you're on the right side of the good guests, the good guest side of the clock there for this evening. And so that's a cool photo, that or a cool caricature that was done of you for 32 years with Shimano, I think it says, but it's actually been 38 years with Shimano.
38 years now. That was an absolute honor to get that, because Murray Henderson is one of the biggest, the NHL paintings that he's done of the players. Some of his paintings, the auctions, the money they go for charity events and that is absolutely ridiculous. And I thought it was really cool that in the years he's known me, he's only known me as a bass fisherman. Because I went from walleye fishing to muskie fishing because I heard you could get your picture in the paper if you caught a muskie. So we did that. Then I found out that you could get, you could be a pro staff and stuff like that if you went and fished in bass tournaments. And the next thing you know, you're fishing in bass tournaments. But Murray only ever knew me as a bass guy, and he still painted me with a muskie.
Wow.
And when I asked him about it, he said, "Oh, I've seen so many pictures of you in the old days, as he referred to it, of you with muskies." And I said, "Oh, I was as hooked. I mean, I had to keep a thermometer in my mouth. The old guys, they talk about muskie fever. Well, I had to keep a thermometer in my mouth to make sure that I didn't die. People would have to calm me down. Like I told you, it was a daily thing. It wasn't like on Saturday and Sunday. It was every day of the week we scrounged some part of the Rideau River, right down, like Brentwood Park, the end of Centennial Avenue, right down. I've caught them when we right at the Queensway Bridge over the Rideau River there, where it goes over.
Yeah, it's really shallow under there.
I've caught muskies in there right behind the old slaughterhouse where the city dump is now. Right down to Cummings Bridge at Vanier. I've caught them down there wading. That's what I told you. We used to wade because that was all 3, 5, 6 feet deep. We used to wade. We'd spend whole days, be up to your waist in the water all day. We used to have a little floating tote thing we pulled behind us on a strap, and we're just nuts about it.
Wow. Fantastic stuff. Fantastic stories. You're the first guy I ever met who went from muskies to bass. Usually people start out catching a bunch of bass and then they catch a muskie and it changes their world. And you're the only guy who ever went the other way from muskies to bass. And then it became a living. Well, yeah, and then you said it best. So there's words of wisdom from the Musky Monday seminar that you can take home, kids. You can get your picture in the paper if you're a muskie fisherman, but you can drive away in a Ranger boat if you're a really good bass fisherman. So,
done that a few times. It's a good feeling.
You know it big. So yeah, I'm happy with a picture in the paper. You keep driving away in those Rangers. I know you got a parking lot full. So thanks for doing this, Jim. Real pleasure to go back and look at the Rideau, the old days into now, and lots of muskies to be had for lots of years in there. Fantastic.
Cool. Everybody stay safe out there.
And another Go ahead.
Hope they catch some big ones this summer.
It's coming. Can't wait. The water's flowing. We have to go fishing. We've said that a bunch of times. I know. My boat is ready for you, my friend, anytime. Okay. So we'll do that. Maybe with Jordana for a research fish this spring. So
sure.
An Echo Lens. Fantastic. Another Musky Monday Seminar Series in the books, everybody. Big Jim McLaughlin. Thanks so much for tuning in. Colin McEwen, the new fly fisher, and his team next week, talking about the it fish in the fly fishing world, the muskellunge. See you all then. Thanks for coming out, everybody.